Hey everyone, I'm very excited and can't wait to offer some health tips on wellness and information during this unfortunate situation we all found ourselves in. And the important thing is that we have to keep positive and look on what we can do and what we can take back into our control, which includes our health. So without further ado, I want to start sharing my slides with you. So there's actually 4 points that I want to talk to you about today, and hopefully these will, as soon as you understand them and take them away, you start implementing them. So the benefit, of course, like anything else, is action, not just information. So first important point is how can you actually take over the control on an infinite game that I call health. And I'll explain what I mean about that in just a minute. And also the second point I want to mention is something called chronic biodisruptors, which are actually the root cause that affects not only you getting any particular condition or you being susceptible to any virus or bacteria. And of course, I'm talking about the immune system. And the third step or third point I want you guys to take away is the phases. There's actually phases in your health and well-being. And in case you do have a chronic condition, there's also a healing process. So just like if I were to give you a metaphor or an example, if you were to have a cut and your hand is bleeding, right? There's a DNA excellence or program that takes on that goes through a healing process to heal that wound. For example, it shoots out clotting cells, so it stops the bleeding first of all, heals that. As a matter of fact, I'm sure we've all experienced it where you feel some heat, even some swelling for a little while, and then all of a sudden there's a scab and the wound is healed. So there is an excellence, DNA excellence and program that's we're all born with that has innate resources to healing, but there's an actual process to it. And I'm going to go through that with you as well. And the last but not least, I want to give you some action steps to take away so that you start implementing and boosting your immune system and actually preventing any unfortunate situation that you don't want to be in, whether it be contracting some kind of virus or bacteria or chronic condition. So I want to mention here, in case we go on to the presentation and forget to mention this point, but I always tell my clients, and I always want everyone to understand that we shouldn't always be searching outside ourselves for the next vaccine or the next boost shot to prevent diseases or the next fad diet or the next pill or everything like that. So what I want you to understand is that for any cure, whether it be chronic conditions or viruses that anyone is looking for, the best cure is not to get it. So preventative medicine is key here, and you need to be able to take control over your health and well-being. Okay? So I want to let you know who I am and why I'm the expert, because, you know, why should you take advice from me, right? So my name is Dr. Hanan Selim. I'm an international author and also a speaker, international speaker, transformational actually speaker, and recognized by the health gurus around the world as the leadership in healthcare. And I have quite a few awards under my belt from around the world and globally. So before we start on the points that I just mentioned, I was coming across on the internet Bill Gates' post, and it was quite interesting and kind of goes along with what we're going to talk about today. And you guys could go online and Google it, and it's called Spiritual Purpose. And what he's talking about here is the situation of the coronavirus. and how he sees it and looks at it. And it's quite interesting how people like himself, Bill Gates, and a lot of the leaders around the world are looking always at the cup half full, if you will, instead of the cup half empty. And this is actually where you are able to make changes, where you're able to protect yourself, where you're able to make control the situation, if you will. Yeah. So it's a long post, but I do have highlighted this one particular. I think he has like nine points that he was trying to make on the post, but I like number 3 really a lot. I mean, he goes on and speaks more about the situation and our health and everything. And here he says it is reminding us of how precious our health is and how we move to neglect it through eating nutrient-poor manufactured food and drinking water that is contaminated with chemicals upon chemicals. And I know I mentioned one of the points when we started is the chronic biodisruptors. And this is exactly one of the chronic biodisruptors that is in our environment and that we can do something about it. So it's unfortunate that at a time like this, or anything actually, when we start it starts to be threatened or put in a situation where it's out of our control, then our focus goes to it, right? It's like our health. So everybody's, health conscious. How do I improve my health? How do I protect myself? Because now they're in that stress or a fight or flight situation, and they're trying. That's where our attention is brought to our health and well-being. So let's go on to the first point I want to here, and that is absolutely, you do have absolute control over your health and well-being. And why do I call it a game, infinite game? Because there is a lot of infinite games, okay? And we're all trying to win this infinite game called marriage, this infinite game called business, and including health and well-being. There is no such thing as winning this game. So what you can do is understand what the perception or how to look at this infinite game, and we cannot use a finite mindset. What do I mean? So if you see here on the screen, there's this whole wheel of wellness, right? That includes your health, well-being, it includes your business, it includes your relationships, your marriage, and everything like that. And when we try to address all of this and not focus on that one thing that might be the root cause that's affecting everything else, you get overstressed, overwhelmed, and nothing seems to be getting right or on track again. So if you see next to it, I have something called the Rubik's Cube. I'm sure we all remember that from our childhood. But the strategy that we use is similar that I'm trying to bring across in our wellness as well. So you see that white part of the Rubik's Cube. If we just focus on that one cube and try to align that one part and then move on to the other colors, that's where we make a difference. That's where we make an impact and a change, instead of being overwhelmed and trying to do everything at the same time. And just like the Rubik's Cube, you will never solve it if you try to do all the colors at the same time. So if we focus on our health as a primary goal, that will have a ripple effect and put everything else into balance. One point I want to make here is that I always hear people talk about this work-life balance. I don't like it, because as you see in this wheel of wellness, work, yes, it is part of your wellness and your overall life, but it's not the only thing. I mean, anyone who doesn't have good health or good mindset or finances is an issue, or their relationship is an issue, of course that's going to affect your work as well. So we don't want to just focus on work and hope for the best that it'll help with your health, your relationship, your finances, because it's not going to happen. It's going to have a ripple effect, yes, but it's not that one thing that we need to focus on. Okay. So what do I mean by finite mindset? So let's go back to the infinite game called health, right? If we focus on that for a minute. So coming from a healthcare background, 25 years, and actually clinical pharmacist working in Manhattan, on doing just that, I was the person in charge of doing chemotherapy for cancer patients, as well as creating formulary for other patients in the hospital. So what I'm talking about finite is that we're using these strict step-by-step protocols to address an infinite gain. So if anyone's familiar with this particular drug, glucophage, it's the first protocol that a doctor would give a patient who either suspects that has diabetes or is just gotten diagnosed with diabetes. And as you see, this was discovered or manufactured, this drug, in 1958. Cytoxin and these other chemotherapy drugs that you see as the next slide or the next picture here, these were manufactured and discovered post-World War II. And the reason I have the mobile phone here was actually when we discovered the mobile phone in 1973. So the point I'm trying to make is we've come such a long way in technology, but unfortunately we're standing at a standstill in healthcare. So that's why it's more important now than ever, and has always been, that you need to take control over your health and well-being and not rely on outside resources using these protocols that may or may not work for you. And we're all familiar with this one size fits all. And if it's, imagine trying to buy a dress or something that's a one size fits all. It's not going to fit you, right? The same thing with the medications that we're prescribing from 60, as you see, 60, 70 years ago. I mean, times have changed, viruses have changed, and we need to catch up. But in the meanwhile, while healthcare is trying to catch up and do the research, you need to actually take action and take control to help yourself before the time goes on and then you're in a chaotic situation. Okay, the second point I want to make is something called chronic biodisruptors, which are actually the root cause. What do I mean by that? So if we go back to diabetes, okay, so when you go to the doctor and you get diagnosed with this diabetes, the first thing the doctor wants to address is the pancreas, the organ, the symptoms, right? And it's proven over and over again that that's not the root cause. The root cause is a lot deeper, and it might be emotional, might be a story, it might be a mindset, it might be many things, it might be a lifestyle or nutrition or everything, but we need to find what that root cause is. Just like we were looking at that example of the Rubik's Cube, we need to look at that one particular color to focus on and try to adjust and help ourselves to get to understanding what exactly is happening or what is the root cause. As you see here, through 17 years of research that I've been doing, trying to do just that, to find the root cause of these chronic conditions like diabetes, obesity, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, and so on. And what I realized what we're focusing on is stress, anxiety, and depression. And that actually makes up only 15% of what we need to do to address these chronic conditions, like I mentioned, diabetes and obesity and everything else. If you look down, nutrition, yes, nutrition is important, but it actually makes up 10% of what if we even address that, and the anxiety is still not enough. Sleep, of course, is very important, but again, this is only 10% of the equation. And 9%, of course, is only exercise and activity. And what I realized in my research is makes up 56% is what we call the chronic biodisruption. Now, this all started 17 years ago when I was researching, and I found something called blue zone countries. So they were, someone initiated trying to find out where these particular population across the world that were living 100 and beyond. And there was actually only 7 countries, or cities, I should say, across the world that these people were living 100 and beyond, and they were healthy. They didn't die. They didn't have any of these chronic conditions that advanced countries were going through. So they decided to research and see what these people, what are they doing? What is their lifestyle like? What is the steps that they're doing? And they realized it's that their eating habits, what they're eating, how they're eating, and their activities and all that. But I took that research above and beyond, and I realized, okay, what is their environmental situation that they are having that's keeping them healthy versus what advanced countries like the US, America, Europe, and UK. And my focus was actually on the advanced countries across the world. And as you all know, the US, Europe, even Dubai, diabetes is on the rise, obesity is on the rise, high blood pressure, and all these chronic conditions are even not only just for adults anymore, it's actually affecting our future generations and our children as well. So it's very important that we understand what these chronic biodisruptors are. And as you see, even the health conscious people out there and the sports people out there, they're also getting the virus. They're also, unfortunately, getting these chronic conditions. And some of them actually drop dead from heart failure or heart attack. So just our sleeping habits, our activities, our nutrition, our anxiety and stress is not doing it for a lot of us, and for being healthy and watching over our well-being. So what is the chronic biodisruptors that I'm talking about? So let's get more specific. So this includes emotional drivers. So if you are having some emotional issues, you're sad, you're depressed, or you have some other underlining emotional issues, that's going to affect you. Interference. So if you travel a lot, or if you have any, those powerhouse itisalat or phone houses next to you, that's gonna environmental challenges. What do I mean by environmental challenges? I mean like pesticides, pollution, and things of the sort. I'm going to run them real fast, just so you have. I'm not saying that we all have these, but what happens usually is one or two, or even three of these, if they are compounded on top of each other, this is where trouble happens, and where you're more predisposed to having a chronic condition and affecting your immune system. Autonomic nervous system functions, microbial balance. I mean, by if you have parasites, or if you have gut issues, protein synthesis, if you're not able to break down, protein, gut support indicators, like I said, circulatory support indicators, electromagnetic sensitivity indicators. Now, what do I mean by those? I mean, you're doing it right now. You're watching me on the laptop. So this is what I'm talking about: laptops, iPhones, TV screens, and things like that. These are also going to be one of the chronic biodisruptors. Vitamins. I mean, some people, they think they're not able to lose weight because, or they're having this cravings for sweets or salts, and it turns out that they're just missing a certain mineral or a vitamin in their diet. Antioxidants and food sensitivity indicators. And I'm not talking about just food allergies. I'm talking about things that you're eating, like avocado, or like the kale, or anything that is good. Yes, it is categorized under the nutrition value as good for you, but that doesn't mean that it's actually your body accepts it or is able to metabolize it, and it might not actually. It might be doing harm than good. Muscle support indicators, and of course sleep deficiency, if you're not drinking enough water or hydration, oxidative stress, of course chemicals like I talked about, and metals in your environment. So now this leads me into the third point, which is, okay, so maybe you have some of this in your environment, and you might be susceptible or predisposed, or your immune system might be affected by it. But this also leads, you need to understand that there's, like I mentioned earlier, there's actually phases of this chronic stress that your body might be because of these biodisruptors. We go back to that example I gave you with the diabetes patient. So Once that diabetes patient gets to the doctor and has these symptoms, and the doctor asks him to do the glucose levels, and it becomes, the lab results come back that it's elevated, hence he gets diagnosed with diabetes. So at that point of time where the doctor says, okay, you have diabetes, it's not actually when you have diabetes. It's actually, and you've been in this something called the stress phase. As you see on the screen, it's the longest period that you could be before you actually get the symptoms and the diagnosis when you go to the doctor's office. So if we take diabetes as an example, you could be in the stress phase for 10 to 15 years before you get actual diagnosis, called pre-diabetes. Cancer also, the statistics and the research shows that you could be in there for 10 to 15 years as well. The biggest one that was that I came across, the research showed that you could actually be up to 20 to 25 years in the stress phase before you actually get Alzheimer's disease. And the list goes on and on. So it's very important to understand this innate resources, just like the healing of the scar or the bleeding that we talked about just a minute ago, that's the same process your body will have to go through to try to heal the cancer, the obesity, the chronic conditions, diabetes, and so on and so forth. So it's very important not only to understand what is in your environment, but where you are with these chronic by disruption in the phases. Okay, so what do I mean by that? I mean, like, okay, so let's say, like I mentioned, the results or the symptoms or the glucose indicator, or you're diagnosed with diabetes. Okay, so when conventional medicine, they're going to give you glucophage or whatever, insulin if you're insulin resistance and so on. So that's the obvious. Okay, so we're at the top of the iceberg. But what we need to do to nuke this is to get below the iceberg. What is going on underneath that? That could be the root cause that you could actually do something about, and take control over your health and well-being without needing that on top of the iceberg, where you need to take drugs or medications and lifestyle, nutrition. And before we implement all of that, it's very crucial and important to get underneath where is everything is the root cause, where it might be that we could alleviate it. So how do you do that? So during my research, I've developed something called a self-check progress report. What you do is, I don't know if you could see, look on here on the that sheet, the progress sheet, but there's a scale of numbers there. Okay, so if we take the first one, if you could see, the first one is tired, right? So you would actually mark 1 if you're extremely tired, 10 if you're never tired. And then you go on to answering all of these questions about your emotions, your temperament, what is some more on here, your appetite, acne, your voice, and everything. And that, you put that number to the side, and all the way at the bottom, you add all those numbers and you get a total. So what does that total mean? That total actually tells you where you are in the healing process, those phases that I was just talking about. Are you in the stress phase? Are you in the healing peak? Are you in the regeneration phase? And what can you do exactly at that point? So it's customized. Again, it's not a one size fits all. Where are you at? What's happening? What is your environmental stressors? What is your chronic bite disruptors are adding up that's causing actually these symptoms? And once we start understanding where you are in this process, you could actually have the tools and information and guidance to be able to prevent any catastrophe in your health and well-being. So here's the highest score. If you did this self-check progress sheet, you would have a different score. So 191 to 225 would mean that you're actually going through a healing peak. So that traumatic, so you're actually out of that long stress phase, and now you're going above and beyond regeneration, where in this situation would be the actual scab. Okay, it's finished, you're healing, and the scab is still there, but there's some irritations that you need to understand and take care of, okay? And again, the numbers It tells you where exactly you are, if you're between 0 to 40, 41 to 75, and so on and so forth. Okay. The fourth thing that I want to talk to you about, and what can you do now? What if you didn't do this, or you don't know where you are in this healing process, but you want something to do about your health and well-being, to be able to avoid any virus, catching any virus, or prevent disease or things like that. So what you want to do is try to align what I call the mind, brain, organ, and get it into flow. Okay, so if you start with the mind and have it in the right wave, if you will, then the organ will follow, releasing certain chemicals, and then the brain will follow to release certain chemicals, and the organ symptoms will subside. And listen, because the organ is just going to create the symptoms following the orders from the mind and brain. Okay, so that's why I don't want to get scientific on you, but basically in layman's terms, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to address the organ, the pancreas, the diabetes, and all that, by focusing on that which triggered it in the first place, which is not the pancreas or the organ, but it's actually something else that might be happening in the mind and the brain. Okay. So what could you guys be doing right now to improve your health and well-being? So what I call is brain training. I call 3 B's actually. The first B is brain training. What is brain training? Brain training actually gets you, remember when we talked about those, that you want to be in the right brain wave, so the organ and the mind would follow. So you want to train the brain to be that way, to get into the right brain waves. And the right brain wave you want to be is called gamma. Gamma brain waves allows your body or your brain to release positive, happy chemicals. These positive, happy chemicals are healing chemicals or hormones or enzymes or whatever you want to call them. And they go to the exact place, and there's an intelligence that we all have that goes to that. If you're having some issues with diabetes, it will go to the pancreas and do what it needs to do, just like it did for the bleeding and the scab. Okay, so what do you do in the brain training? When you get up first thing in the morning, you count from 100 to 1 backwards. 100, 99, 98, 97, 96, and so on and so forth. That gets your brain, just like your exercise physically, it exercises or gets the brain to release these chemicals. And what I recommend is, if your English is your first language and Arabic is your second, then do Arabic, because the more resistance that you have, the more resistance that you create for the brain, the more impactful, and those chemicals are much more and more powerful. The second, oh, and sorry, before I move on, the next 10 days, you count from 50 to 1 backwards, and the last 10 days is 10 to 1 backwards. So it's actually a 30-day exercise. And as anyone knows, in order to create a new habit or to create the outcome that you really want, it takes about 21 to 30 days. Okay. The next B I want to talk about is called breathing technique. And I know a lot of people are familiar with the breathing techniques for yoga and meditation, but this one in particular, it also helps us with the brain releasing the positive chemicals and happy chemicals that we want. Okay. So this is how we do it. It's called the 6-6-9 breathing technique. What do? You inhale on 6, you hold on 6, and you release on 9. So if I were to show you right now, it's 1, and you're taking your deep breath, count 6. Hold, release. That's it. So it actually calms the mind. It's able to focus. If there's a problem, you see the solution. You're not actually focusing on the problem anymore. And again, it boosts those chemicals, those happy chemicals, serotonin, anandamide, dopamine. Those are the chemicals we're talking about that are really what we call the healing chemicals that you want to boost your immune system. And something last I call the body tactic. What do I mean by the body tactic? So I'm sitting right now, I'm speaking to everyone here. So I'm having these negative thoughts or negative cortisol, then is then getting released in my body, causing inflammation and affecting my immune system, and actually predisposing me to chronic conditions. So if you're sitting physically, if you are sitting, you stand up. If you're inside, you go outside. Maybe if there's a balcony. If you're reading, stop reading and do something else. So the physicality of you changing the positioning of your body will actually change the chemicals that you're releasing on the inside of the body as well. So that's it, guys. I hope this has benefited you. If you guys have any questions, you could send it over to Mina Speakers, or you could directly send me at info@drhananselim.com. So signing off and talk to you guys soon. Take care. Bye-bye. Good. Hello.